Welcome back. We are joined today by Dmitry Polyansky, the first deputy permanent representative of the Russian Federation to the United Nations. So thank you very much for coming back on. We see that, after decades of Cold War, being locked into a struggle with the US, there was, of course, the post-Cold War era in which the European security architecture was organized around NATO expansion. So yet again, locking the US and Russia into this zero-sum rivalry for another 30 years. But this new national security strategy, if genuine, and I have to emphasize that, could signal an opportunity, though, for a complete reset in US-Russia relations. Do you think there's reason for Moscow to be optimistic or cautiously optimistic? Or what are your thoughts about the new documents as a diplomat who does engage with the American counterpart?
Well, it's the U.S. document first and foremost. It has certain signals which we process, but of course we first and foremost have to process our bilateral meetings and arrangements and talks. The breakthrough meeting, I think, was in Anchorage, and we still continue to build upon the outcome of this meeting. Today, my foreign minister emphasized that the meeting between Stephen Witkoff and President Putin and his team on December 2 were very much continuation of this spirit of Anchorage, which means that the impetus is still there and that we're still talking and discussing things. So we believe for us this is more important of how we discuss things bilaterally and what we design bilaterally than unilateral U.S. documents. I don't want to criticize it. I don't want to praise it. It's a U.S. document, and of course there are a lot of interesting things there, a lot of signals which would be different from what we could imagine a year ago, or especially a couple of years ago. So it's an interesting development. It's an interesting development. What is important that we're now talking like adults. We're not avoiding difficult issues. We're trying to find solutions. Doesn't mean that we're everywhere on the same page, but at least we started to speak to each other, and we started to identify the problems in the way the adults should identify these problems, not in the way that Europe does, trying to ignore a lot of security issues, trying to live in some unrealistic world, and trying to portray Russia as a foe, as an enemy, not worthy of speaking to. But in normal pragmatic way, as great powers should interact, because a lot of responsibility is on their shoulders and they have to face this situation for the interests of the whole world. That's what we are doing, and that's quite encouraging right now.
Do you see the limitations, though, on this diplomatic path? Well, I guess, is there limitations on how far the bilateral US-Russia relations can be developed without first resolving the war in Ukraine, given that this has been, well, primarily a proxy conflict between NATO and Russia?
Well, military solution in Ukraine was not our choice, and we made a lot of attempts to solve this crisis of European security by diplomatic means, but we were not heard. So we had to do what we did, and by doing so, from day one, as you remember, we were reiterating that we would prefer to have diplomatic solution for all the contradictions that are now there in Europe, in Ukraine, or elsewhere. So Ukraine was totally a Western product. It was Western-inspired unconstitutional coup d'etat. Now this country bears fruit of what happened in 2014, sometimes even earlier than 2014. And it's up to those who were behind this coup d'etat, behind this anti-Russia project implemented in Ukraine, to find a solution that would allow us to move forward with dignity and with a clear view of the future and with optimism. So far, Europe is not doing this. There are different winds in the US, which is encouraging, but Europe is very disappointing, and still every effort that they take is to derail the process, to undermine the process, and to kind of make Ukraine fight further with all the terrible consequences for this country, for its manpower, for its future. This is European choice, which is very, very weird, and I would say very selfish against the backdrop of what is happening with the help of Russia and US leadership right now.
Often when I listen to different analysts or commentators, they often split in terms of what the United States, their ambitions, because some would say that they're genuine in pursuing peace, given that, well, during the bipolar era or unipolar, there was a natural confrontation with Russia, but in the multipolar, the incentives are now more towards cooperation. But the alternative is that this is just some strategic sequencing on handing over, confronting Russia to the Europeans, and often the question that comes up then is, if the US really wanted, given that it has so much power of Ukraine, wouldn't it be able to do more to end this conflict, given that it provides a lot of the intelligence and weapons, logistics, advisors, and also some solutions? Seems like the US could provide themselves, that is not expanding NATO. You don't need Kiev's consent. This looks like it's within Washington's ability. I was wondering how you make sense of this.
Well, there are some hints that this is the logic in Washington right now, to find more sustainable long-term solutions which go far beyond the situation in Ukraine. They are still very modest, and I don't want to over-exaggerate them, but this is quite a encouraging trend that we face right now, and we started to speak to discuss these issues, because for many, many years, well, of course, the logical starting point would be President Putin's speech in Munich in 2007. We were trying to show the problems that we will face inevitably if the West doesn't change the logic of this zero-sum game, the logic of NATO being the corner of its security, the attempts to undermine the notion of indivisible security, regardless of the fact that they agreed to put it into some OSCE documents, as you know. So this was the process that was clear from the outset that it would lead us to big problems, and President Putin in 2007 made absolutely blunt assessment of it, and a clear analysis of what lies ahead if the West doesn't change course. The West didn't. The question is what will happen right now after Ukraine settlement, because this settlement is only part of a picture. There is a bigger picture, and there is a big elephant in the room that we can't ignore. Americans started to adapt their optics towards this. I'm very encouraged by some statements of US representatives, for example, vis-a-vis OSCE, very important organization which is undervalued right now, and which is a bit idle or sleeping. But the ideas that were put forward, they can be basis for cooperation among all the members of OSCE, all European countries, and it might bring us somewhere positive, I would say, somewhere forward-looking. Again, a lot of caveats, a lot of countries that don't want to see the reality in the way US sees it right now, but still it's a start. And after we find a solution to this crisis, we will have to deal with a bigger issue if we don't want to come to a situation when there will be another war in Europe, not because Russia wants it, not because Russia wants to attack NATO or the EU, but because of the trend that the current European elites have tried to foment in their societies. The only logic that they have is that Russia is an enemy, that Russia will inevitably attack, that Europe should prepare to the war with Russia, and they try to use it as a smokescreen to conceal their own mistakes, their own miscalculations, the problems of their society. This is a logic that has been implemented in such cases for many decades, that if you have big problems at home, try to find an external enemy and try to kind of zombie your public opinion, because a war is a solution to the bankrupt political elites that want to preserve their existence. Nothing new here. Everything is in the history books, but many people unfortunately don't read the history books.
Well, in this new security document, the United States seems to will argue then that the NATO expansion, that it's it's past its due date. It's time to find different solutions. Now, NATO expansion is what essentially redivided the continent, though, and kind of brought back some of the logic of the Cold War. Now, you mentioned the OSCE. Do you see any possibility of actually going that deep in addressing the root causes in terms of I guess reducing the role of NATO and elevating the OSCE? Is this something that the United States is interested in? I mean, the OSCE part.
Yeah, I think that it's too premature to be too optimistic on this, but there are certain elements, certain statements that can lead to somewhere that go in the right direction of understanding the root causes of the crisis. As for us, it's quite clear that NATO is absolutely not part of a solution; it's part of a problem, and it's a relic of the Cold War. And there were very bold ideas. I remember them at the end of the 90s, beginning of the 90s, and even at the beginning of 2000s, to create some kind of a pan-European security organization that would mean that there will be no NATO in the way it is there right now, organization that would take on board the interests of security, legitimate interests of security and interests of all the European and not only European countries in Euro-Atlantic maybe dimension. But these bold ideas were absolutely sacrificed by the logic of survival of NATO, and NATO is has become an offensive bloc in the absence of Warsaw Treaty organization. That was quite clear, and the crisis in Yugoslavia was a clear example of how this transformation of NATO, without having a rival or foe capable of withstanding the pressure, how it's implemented in practice. And this was a terrible development for Europe, for the world. And this is, I think, the root cause of a lot of problems that we're having today. And for many decades and years, Western countries didn't acknowledge that this is a problem for them. The task was to create a security architecture which would exclude Russia, which would be at the expense of Russia, and that was the criteria for success or not success of this architecture. This logic should remain part of history and not part of what we are working on right now. And there are all the indications that there is an understanding that we need to kind of be very creative and very open-minded in addressing security issues, first and foremost in the US. And again, this is encouraging, but I wouldn't overestimate this importance, because the US is an important player, but there are others who are still very stubborn and who are still very much dragged in the past, in this mentality of the Cold War and this Russophobia. And for me, there is still not the light at the end of the tunnel in this way. So there's a lot of work ahead. Russia was always willing to do this part of the job. Russia was always open-minded, but we were not heard. We were always treated as some country on the outskirts of Europe and the OSCE. If we speak about this organization, its logic, instead of trying to embrace everyone and to work on this security equation that would embrace Russia, it turned out to be kind of a Western tool to civilize, in brackets, the countries to the east of Vienna, to impose Western values, to meddle into their internal affairs. If this logic changes, I think that this organization has a very bright future, and Russia would be ready to work with everybody else. If not, well, I think that this organization might also become part of a history which would be very wasted chance for European countries to attain real stability and a bright future.
I remember in the 90s, a lot of us American leaders, senior leaders, who had some high hopes as well for the OSCE, though, and were quite disappointed in NATO expansion. George Kennan, William Perry, and multiple others. But when we hear now this proposed peace agreements coming out of United States, so in different versions, it suggests that the concessions coming from Russia would be, well, for example, Russia wouldn't move on restoring Ukraine's neutrality, so no NATO, and of course Donbass is also no room. But the Americans are suggesting that there might be a deal where there's essentially drawn new administrative borders for Kherson and Zaporizhia. Is this something that the Americans have, or I'm not sure what the what is possible to disclose yet, but is this something that the Americans are basing on discussions with Russia, or is this more of an American wish list?
Well, I'm not part of the team which is discussing the details of this possible arrangement. I was not part of the didn't take part in the meeting that happened on the 2nd of December, so it might not be very wise for me to speculate on the details. But I know that there is a serious conversation. It implies, of course, territorial issue. You said about concessions from Russia. Well, one concession from Russia, and I think even President Trump indicated this, that if there is an agreement, then we will stop our advance to the rest of Ukraine, because we will have some guarantees that this part of Ukraine, the remaining part of Ukraine, will live according to the rules, according to normal civilized rules, where everybody will have the right to national identity, to speak the language they want, the right to the freedom of religion, that there will be no glorification of Nazi criminals. All these things are important, and they are on the table. So very important would be how this remainder of Ukraine will look like. We want to have a normal, peace-loving neighbor, which used to be before 2014, or maybe before 2010, I would say. We want to have the country with which we signed the treaty on the strategic treaty. We acknowledge the neutral status of Ukraine, and all these things about NATO, they appeared later on, and they were not agreed with Russia, of course. So we want to come back to this situation, and we don't want to have this hornet's nest on our borders. We want to have a normal, peace-loving neighbor, and we are ready to have very good and neighborly relation with this country. And there are a lot of indications that it's a possible scenario, given the fact that more than 7 million Ukrainians found refuge in Russia after the beginning of this crisis, and it's much more than in Europe. And still, there are a lot of bonds between our two peoples, regardless of the attempts of many in Europe to kind of show that there is forever animosity between Russia and Ukraine. This is not true. I am absolutely sure that Russians and Ukrainians will be able to not only to live in peace, but also to cooperate when this absolutely artificial regime that was imposed in 2014 will go away, and well, when no one will interfere into the Ukrainian affairs in the way Western countries did it before 2014, and especially after 2014.
Well, you mentioned a few times about the European leaders and that they continue on a path, which could lead to further conflicts with Russia. But the recent statements, though, from different European leaders suggest that they're preparing for long-term confrontation with Russia, even if the United States pulls back from this conflict. Do you think there's a possibility that we could actually end up in a direct war?
if everything goes like this, and if the elites in Europe do not change, and if they continue the course that they have, there is a big possibility for such conflict, and it will not be Russia's choice. It will. It is becoming, the only raison d'être for not only for NATO but also for the EU. So as I told you, they need an enemy. They need someone that would attract or distract attention of the European populations from all the problems that they have at home. They need someone to blame on, but it's ridiculous, for example, to blame on Russia the problems with the living standards of the European populations when Europe itself decided not to buy cheap Russian energy sources. So look at Germany, what happened there. Is it a problem caused by Russia that Germany has now to buy energy sources from the US, from other sources, and the prices are, of course, not competitive with that from Russia? This was a deliberate choice, and the German elites and European elites bear the full responsibility for this, but they don't want to take responsibility. They want to find an enemy, and the enemy is Russia. So if nothing changes, this is a very dangerous future that we might have. But I know that not everyone in Europe thinks like this, and I'm not also having in mind countries like Hungary or Slovakia. There are sane voices in many European countries, and hopefully they will be able to translate their position into practical moves and to press the elites to get away from this absolutely suicidal course that Europe is now choosing. So this is a big issue, whether they will be able to change the optics and to engage in real constructive and open-minded dialogue with Russia. Again, first and foremost, I have in mind OSCE, but there might be other forums, other opportunities. There is such a scenario, such an option which Russia would prefer. Today, my foreign minister, for example, confirmed that we would be ready to sign legal treaties, legal guarantees with NATO and the EU as a first step to finding a solution to our problems, that no one will attack no one. So it's kind of non-aggression, I would say, pact between EU, NATO, and Russia. Are these blocks ready to this kind of logic? I doubt it very much, because judging from what their leaders are saying, they are not ready to do so. They are not ready to abandon the concept of Russia being an enemy and Russia allegedly willing to attack EU and NATO. There are also ridiculous things, all these statements recently by the active Finnish presidency of OSCE and Mrs. Kaja Kallas, which is notorious for her weak knowledge of history, saying that Russia allegedly attacked its neighbors 22 times and nobody attacked Russia in the 20th century. This is very ridiculous, very provocative, but it shows the line of conduct that they want to kind of make a basis for any further European action. I'm absolutely sure that both of them are aware of the peculiarities of history, because this is not a peculiarity, this is a basics of history that they try to ignore by these statements. But they deliberately try to form public opinion in Europe, especially young Europeans, which maybe do not have such big knowledge of history for many reasons, to form them in the way that Russia is an enemy, that Russia has always been threatening Europe, which is ridiculous, of course. And I hope that most people in Europe understand the absolutely unnecessary scenario that is being imposed on them by such statement and such policy.
Let me just ask a last question, though. Is there any diplomacy currently on between the Europeans and the Russians? Because we now see that, Lavrov, he argued that the European leaders were gripped by a militarist frenzy, and but if they want a war, then Russia is ready for it right now. While the NATO side's Secretary General Mark Rutte said that we are Russia's next target. We have to prepare now for war because Russia's coming for us. I mean, if if we are seemingly heading towards that direction, is there really no talking? Is it at least unofficial exchanges happening, or is it just no talk whatsoever between the two sides?
Well, it takes two to tango, of course, here. Russia was always there. We never stopped our dialogue with Europe. Europe did it in a very condescending and short-sighted way. I can tell you that if we speak about official context, if we speak about public attempts to establish something, I don't think that we can boast of anything substantial. Well, not mentioning maybe the reaching out by President Macron to President Putin at some point, but which led us to nowhere. So President Macron's erroneous logic has not changed. I can tell you that informally, I feel certain change in attitude of our European colleagues, even here at the UN. So there have become more meetings on the couloirs. There have become more informal exchanges, which has not led us anywhere so far. But they might become a building block for some re-engagement in the future. Again, I can clearly distinguish between countries like France, Germany, Italy, even the UK, I don't know, some Netherlands, even Belgium, some other countries, and also Switzerland, that try to find solution informally, but they try to be open-minded. And there is another group of countries which is now mostly limited to 4 countries like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. And these countries are very hysterical about any possibility of re-engaging with Russia. They keep everybody else on this suicidal track. And I think that the other members of European community are very mindful of these hysterical Russophobic nations that try to monopolize the Eastern policy and the Russian policy in their hands. And I don't know whether they will be successful in intimidating the others in the way they do right now. But again, there is a trend, very modest, but still there is a desire to kind of re-engage from certain European countries, but not from the EU, of course. And unfortunately, the EU structures, the EU leaders that we have right now are also damaging very much this prospect. They are trying to kind of align themselves with these radicals, Russophobic radicals from these 3 Baltic states and Poland. This is quite clear. But it's up to Europe to decide which path it wants to take. Again, we can't force anyone. We are open. We are ready for a dialogue. We have concrete ideas, and they know that we have concrete ideas. Hopefully, we will be able to re-engage at some platform in the nearest future, because it's both in our interests and in the interests of the whole world. But another scenario is also possible if Europe remains where it is, if it's stubborn, if it doesn't want to re-engage. Then, of course, I can't exclude that at some point of time there will be some military problem, which will again, as history shows, leave Europe in ruins and with all the broken hopes, and we will have to start from zero. Of course, we don't want such a scenario. Nobody in Russia is interested in it. Nobody in Russia wants to attack EU or NATO or anybody else. The question is, what is the choice of the other side? So I hope that they will come to right choice and that they will be able to re-engage with open mind and to look for this optimal security equation that would include Russia, that would include the basic notion of indivisible security, that would think about the whole of our European continent and not about shielding European countries of the EU from Russia, from influence of Russia. This is a big mistake, and I don't think that Europe should do it twice.
Thank you. And no, I hope as well there will be some improvements in the diplomacy. The shutdown of diplomacy is, in my opinion, been one of the great tragedies here, though. Unable to even speak. So I hope, well, probably not with Callas, but but at least if you get some indication, some other European leaders are talking. Hopefully, there's a reason to be optimistic. Hopefully, I will add. But thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.